The Johnson family stood at the Family Feud podium, looking like any other contestants. Smiling, excited, nervous about the cameras and the lights and Steve Harvey's jokes. But what the 300 people in that studio didn't know was that the night before, all 5 members of the Johnson family had slept in their 2004 Honda Odyssey in the Family Feud parking garage. They'd been homeless for 6 months, living out of their van, showering at truck stops, the kids doing homework by flashlight, and they were playing this game for one reason: the $20,000 prize money was exactly enough for first month's rent, security deposit, and maybe some groceries for their first week in an actual home. When Marcus Johnson stepped up to answer Steve Harvey's question, nobody expected what would happen next. One answer, 4 words. And suddenly this wasn't a game show anymore. It was the moment a man's dignity, his family's hope, and America's hidden crisis collided on national television. Steve Harvey would make a decision that day that broke every game show rule he'd ever followed. And what happened in the weeks after that episode aired would prove that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is see someone when the whole world has looked away. The family nobody saw coming. Marcus Johnson was 41 years old when everything fell apart. He'd worked in construction for 19 years. Good job, union benefits. He and his wife Teresa had bought a small house in Riverside, California in 2007. They had 3 kids. Deshaun, 16, Alicia, 13, little Marcus Jr., 9. They were making it, not rich, but stable. Marcus worked hard. Teresa worked part-time at a grocery store. The kids were in good schools. They weren't wealthy, but they had a roof over their heads and food on the table. That's all Marcus had ever wanted: to give his kids better than what he'd had growing up. Then 2015 hit Marcus like a freight train. The construction company he worked for went bankrupt. Overnight, Marcus lost his job, his benefits, his income. He applied everywhere, but construction jobs were scarce. The few available positions went to younger guys willing to work for less. For 3 months, Marcus and Teresa survived on unemployment and Teresa's grocery store paycheck. But unemployment doesn't pay the mortgage. They fell behind. 2 months, 3 months, the bank started foreclosure proceedings. Marcus found odd jobs, day labor, cash under the table. It wasn't enough. In January 2016, they lost the house. Everything they'd worked for gone. The plan was to stay with Teresa's sister in Los Angeles until they got back on their feet. But Teresa's sister's apartment was tiny, already housing 6 people in a 2-bedroom. After 3 weeks, it was clear they couldn't stay. So the Johnson family moved into their van, a 2004 Honda Odyssey with 180,000 miles. It became home. Marcus and Teresa in the front seats, the 3 kids in the back. They kept 2 suitcases of clothes. Everything else went into a storage unit they could barely afford. The kids still went to school. Marcus lied about their address, used Teresa's sisters. Deshaun, the oldest, knew the truth, but didn't tell his younger siblings exactly how bad things were. Alicia suspected. Little Marcus thought it was an adventure, at least at first. They showered at truck stops and gym day passes. They ate cheap fast food when they could, food banks when they couldn't. Marcus worked whatever day labor he could find. Teresa kept her grocery store job, but the hours weren't enough. The shame was crushing. Marcus felt like he'd failed his family. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. He was supposed to protect them, provide for them. And instead, his children were sleeping in a van. But Teresa wouldn't let him break. "We're together," she told him every night. "That's what matters. We're together and we're fighting." The Family Feud application came from Deshaun. He'd seen a commercial, filled out the application online without telling his parents, used his aunt's address. He wrote in the essay section, "My dad is the strongest man I know. He works every day to keep our family together, even when everything is against us. We need this." When the acceptance email came in February 2016, Marcus almost didn't go. How could they drive to Atlanta? They didn't have gas money. They didn't have hotel money. They barely had food money. But the Family Feud production team, when they learned the family was coming from California, offered to cover travel and hotel costs for out-of-state contestants. Marcus didn't tell them about the van. Didn't tell them they'd be sleeping in the hotel lobby if they could. He just said yes. Because that $20,000 wasn't just money, it was first month's rent. It was a security deposit. It was the difference between his kids sleeping in beds or sleeping in a van for another 6 months. It was hope. The question that changed everything. March 2016. The Johnson family stood at their podium on the Family Feud stage. Marcus, Teresa, Deshaun, Alicia, and little Marcus, who at 9 years old was the youngest contestant that day. Steve Harvey did his usual introduction, working the crowd, getting laughs. Johnson family from Riverside, California. Welcome, welcome. Marcus, tell me what you do. Marcus hesitated for just a second. What did he say? I'm between jobs right now. Sounded like giving up. I'm in construction was technically a lie. He settled on, I'm in construction, looking for the right opportunity. Steve nodded, moved on to Teresa, to the kids. Standard Family Feud opening. Nobody in that studio knew that the Johnson family had slept in their van in the parking garage the night before because they couldn't afford the hotel room and didn't want to admit it to production. The game started. First question. Name something people say they'll do tomorrow but never actually do. The Johnsons were playing against the Martinez family from Texas, standard game show energy, buzzers, answers, points. The Johnson family was doing well, holding their own. Then came the fourth question. Steve Harvey walked to center stage with his cards, looked at both families and read, name something you take for granted until you don't have it anymore. It was supposed to be a standard question, probably looking for answers like electricity, internet, your phone, typical American conveniences. The Martinez family had control. They gave their answers. Your health. Good answer. Number 2. Hot water. Number 4. Your car. Number 5. 2 strikes. Then Marcus's turn came. He stepped up to the podium. Steve repeated the question. Name something you take for granted until you don't have it anymore. Marcus opened his mouth to answer, and then something broke inside him. He'd been holding it together for 6 months. The shame, the exhaustion, the weight of seeing his kids sleep in a van while other kids slept in beds. The crushing knowledge that he couldn't fix it no matter how hard he worked. His voice cracked when he answered, a roof over your head. Number 1 answer. 47 points. The Johnson family won the round. But nobody was celebrating because Marcus Johnson was crying, not quiet tears, deep body-shaking sobs. His hands gripped the podium. His wife Teresa immediately moved to his side, her arm around him. Steve Harvey set his cards down. The music stopped. The audience went silent. Because everyone in that studio suddenly realized they weren't watching someone play a game. They were watching a man break under the weight of something nobody had seen coming. The moment Steve Harvey saw the truth. Steve Harvey had been hosting Family Feud long enough to recognize real pain. He'd seen contestants get emotional over wins and losses. But this was different. This was a man who'd been holding something too heavy for too long. Steve walked over to Marcus, quietly, without cameras rushing in. Without making it a spectacle, just one man approaching another who was clearly hurting. Marcus, Steve said gently. Talk to me, what's going on? Marcus tried to compose himself, tried to pull it together, but 6 months of living in a van, of watching his children pretend everything was okay, of carrying the shame of failing to provide, it all came pouring out. We're homeless, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. We've been living in our van for 6 months. My kids sleep in the back, we shower at truck stops. And I can't give them a home. Teresa was crying now too. Deshaun, the 16-year-old, stood frozen, his secret suddenly exposed on national television. Little Marcus didn't fully understand what was happening, but he knew his dad was sad and that made him scared. Steve Harvey looked at Marcus Johnson and saw a man he recognized, not from television or fame but from his own life. Steve had been homeless in the 1980s before his comedy career took off. Steve had lived in his car for 3 years. He'd showered at gas stations. He'd done exactly what Marcus was doing now, fighting to survive while carrying the shame of failure. Look at me, Steve said firmly. Marcus raised his eyes. You are not a failure, you hear me? You're standing here with your family. Together, that's not failure, that's strength. The audience was completely silent, 300 people, holding their breath. Steve turned to the production booth. We need to stop filming, he said, not a request, a statement. Jennifer Morrison, the executive producer, made the same decision she'd made before when Steve needed to handle something bigger than television. Keep the cameras rolling at a distance, but give Steve space to do what needed to be done. Steve looked at the Martinez family, the opposing team. I need to ask you folks something, and I need you to be honest. Would you mind if we pause this game? This family needs something more important than points on a board. The Martinez family patriarch, a man named Roberto who'd driven a truck for 30 years, didn't hesitate. Steve, you do whatever this family needs. We're not here to beat them. We're here to help. What happened when the show stopped being a show? Steve Harvey brought both families to center stage, not as competitors, as human beings. He asked Marcus to tell his story, not for entertainment, not for television, but because sometimes being seen is the first step to being helped. Marcus told them everything. The job loss, the foreclosure, 6 months in a van. His kids doing homework by flashlight, the shame of not being able to provide, the desperate hope that this $20,000 could give his family a home. Teresa talked about the truck stop showers, about stretching $20 of fast food across 5 people for 3 days, about lying to the school about their address because she couldn't let her kids be taken by social services. Deshawn, the 16-year-old, spoke for the first time. I applied to Family Feud because I thought if we won, my dad could stop feeling like he failed us. Because he didn't fail us. He's been fighting for us every single day. There wasn't a dry eye in the studio. The audience was crying. The crew was crying. Both families were crying. And Steve Harvey, who'd lived this story himself decades ago, was crying. But Steve did something that day that went beyond emotion. He did something practical. Here's what we're going to do, Steve said, his voice firm with purpose. We're going to finish this game, but we're not playing Johnson versus Martinez anymore. We're playing both families together for Marcus's family. Every point anybody scores goes to the Johnsons, and I don't care what the producers say, that's what's happening. The audience erupted, not in applause, in a standing ovation that lasted 3 full minutes. The game resumed. But it was different now. When a Martinez family member answered correctly, they pointed to Marcus. When the Johnsons scored points, the Martinez family celebrated with them. This wasn't competition anymore. This was community. By the end of that impossible game, the combined families had won $25,000, more than the standard prize. Steve had somehow convinced production to increase it. But Steve wasn't done. He walked off stage mid-taping, went directly to the production office, and made a phone call that would change everything. The decision that broke every rule. 20 minutes later, Steve Harvey returned to the stage. He'd made calls to his foundation, to his network of connections, to people who owed him favors and people who didn't but would help anyway. Marcus, Steve said, I want you to know something, that $25,000, that's yours. That's your rent. That's your security deposit. That's your fresh start. But I made some calls, and here's what else is happening. Steve explained that his foundation was covering the Johnson family's first year of rent in full, not just 1 month, 12 months, a real chance to get stable, to find work without the constant panic of homelessness hanging over them. But there was more. A construction company owner in Los Angeles, who'd seen the taping, a man named David Chen, who'd built his business from nothing, had offered Marcus a full-time job, union benefits. Starting immediately, David had been homeless once too. He'd told Steve, I remember what it felt like when someone gave me a chance. I want to be that chance for Marcus. A furniture company donated a full house worth of furniture. A local charity provided clothes for the kids. 3 different families offered temporary housing until the Johnsons found their apartment. Marcus Johnson collapsed, not from exhaustion, from relief, from the weight of 6 months suddenly lifting, from the realization that his family was going to sleep in beds that night, that his kids were going to be okay. Teresa held him. The kids surrounded them. Both families, Johnson and Martinez, stood together crying and celebrating, and Steve Harvey stood to the side, watching, his own tears falling freely because he understood what this moment meant in ways most people never would. I lived in my car for 3 years, Steve told the studio. I know what Marcus feels right now. I know that shame, I know that weight, and I know what it means when someone sees you, really sees you. When someone says you matter when you've been invisible for so long. That's what happened here today. The episode couldn't air as a regular game show. Family Feud and Steve's team created a 1-hour special called When Game Shows Become Life Changers. It aired 6 months later and became one of the highest-rated Family Feud broadcasts in history. But what happened off camera was even more powerful. The movement that started in a van. After the taping, Steve Harvey's foundation partnered with Marcus to create something called the Roof Over Your Head Initiative. It wasn't just about Marcus's family. It was about the thousands of families living in cars across America that nobody sees. The statistics are staggering. On any given night, 553,000 people in America are homeless. But 65% of them aren't on the streets. They're in cars, in vans, invisible, going to work, sending their kids to school, looking normal while living in vehicles. Marcus and Teresa became advocates. They started speaking at churches, community centers, corporations, not asking for pity, demanding awareness. Explaining that homelessness doesn't always look like what people think. Sometimes it looks like a family at a game show. Sometimes it looks like your coworker. Sometimes it's invisible until someone decides to see it. Steve's foundation began working with employers to create second-chance hiring programs. Companies committed to hiring people experiencing homelessness, providing stable income that could break the cycle. David Chen's construction company became a model, hiring 47 people from homeless situations in the 3 years after he hired Marcus. The initiative partnered with landlords willing to accept non-traditional rental applications, helped families navigate the bureaucratic nightmare of getting housing when you don't have an address, provided microgrants for security deposits and first month's rent, the barrier that keeps most homeless families trapped. In the 4 years since Marcus's episode aired, the Roof Over Your Head initiative has helped 1,847 families transition from vehicle living to stable housing, not temporary shelters, actual apartments and houses, stable homes. But Marcus says the number that matters most is different. 0. That's how many nights my kids have slept in a van since March 2016. 0. And every night when they go to bed in their rooms, in their beds, I think about the families still sleeping in cars, and I work harder. The Johnson family today. Marcus Johnson still works for David Chen's construction company. He's been promoted twice. He's now a site supervisor, managing teams, training younger workers. He makes enough to support his family comfortably. They rent a 3-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles. It's not fancy, but it's home. Deshaun graduated high school in 2018. He's now at community college studying social work, specifically focused on homeless youth services. I know what it feels like to hide that you're homeless, he says. I know what it's like to pretend everything's okay when you're sleeping in a van. I want to help other kids so they don't have to hide. Alicia is in high school now, captain of her school's debate team. She wrote her college application essay about the 6 months in the van and what it taught her about resilience. Little Marcus, now 13, barely remembers the van days. His older siblings have shielded him from the worst memories. He knows the story, but it's not his trauma. His parents made sure of that. Teresa still works at the grocery store, but now by choice, not necessity. She volunteers 3 days a week with the Roof Over Your Head initiative, helping other families navigate the system she once struggled through. I remember how alone we felt, she says. How invisible. I make sure families know someone sees them. The Johnson family visits Steve Harvey once a year. They have dinner together, talk about life, about the families they've helped, about the journey from that van to where they are now. And every year, Steve gives Marcus the same gift, a key, not to a car, to the 2004 Honda Odyssey that the Johnson family lived in for 6 months. Steve had it restored, detailed, preserved. He gave it back to Marcus with a plaque inside. The vehicle that couldn't break you, March 2016. Remember where you came from. Never forget where you're going. Marcus keeps the van parked in a storage unit. He visits it sometimes, sits in the driver's seat, remembers not to torture himself, but to remind himself that survival is possible, that dignity isn't determined by circumstances, that family is stronger than homelessness. Why this story matters now. Housing insecurity in America has reached crisis levels. The gap between wages and rent has never been wider. Families who work full-time still can't afford housing, and the shame attached to homelessness keeps people silent, invisible, suffering alone. Marcus Johnson's story matters because it makes the invisible visible. It proves that homelessness doesn't always look like stereotypes. It looks like families, like kids going to school, like parents working jobs, like people trying their absolute hardest and still falling through the cracks. Steve Harvey's decision to stop the game, to see Marcus as a human being instead of a contestant, created a ripple effect that's still growing. Every family that's been helped by the Roof Over Your Head initiative traces back to that moment when Steve said this matters more than television. People ask me all the time why I did it, Steve has said in interviews. Why I stopped the game, why I made those calls, why I got involved, and I tell them, because I've been Marcus. I've slept in my car. I've felt that shame. I've known what it's like to be invisible. And when I saw him breaking at that podium, I saw myself 30 years ago. How could I not help? How could anyone not help if they really saw what was happening? The lesson that changed everything. The lesson of Marcus Johnson isn't about game shows or celebrities or lucky breaks. It's about seeing people, really seeing them. Marcus stood on that Family Feud stage, looking like everyone else, but he was carrying something nobody could see until he spoke it out loud. A roof over your head. How many people do we pass every day who are carrying weight we can't see? How many families are one paycheck away from losing everything? How many people are fighting battles in silence because shame tells them to hide? Steve Harvey's gift to Marcus wasn't just money or housing or a job. It was being seen. It was someone saying you matter when Marcus felt like he didn't. It was dignity restored when dignity felt lost forever. And Marcus's gift back to the world is this: his willingness to be seen, to tell his story, to let people know that homelessness can happen to anyone, that it's not a moral failing, that families living in vehicles deserve compassion, not judgment. I'm not ashamed anymore, Marcus says now. I was homeless, my kids slept in a van. That happened, but it doesn't define us. What defines us is that we stayed together. We fought, we survived, and now we help others do the same. That's what matters. The 2004 Honda Odyssey sits in that storage unit, preserved as a reminder, not of failure, but of strength, not of shame, but of survival, not of an ending, but of a beginning that started the day. Marcus Johnson stood at a Family Feud podium and told the truth that changed everything. If you or your family is experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity, visit the Roof Over Your Head initiative at website. Because Marcus and Teresa's story proves that invisible doesn't mean alone, silent doesn't mean forgotten, and one moment of being truly seen can change absolutely everything. Sometimes the most important answer isn't the one that wins the game. It's the one that tells the truth. And sometimes a game show stage becomes the place where dignity is restored, hope is rekindled, and a family fighting to survive is finally seen.